Hi all, I stumbled across a very interesting example of how natural moves can sometimes be disastrous in chess positions. This game is a game of Magnus Carlsen in 2006, which I'm currently checking out, looking for exciting sacrificial play by Magnus. What I found here was a very interesting Sicilian Sveshnikov, and this was much later, but black clearly is a bit worse for wear here. White potentially has got these dangerous passed pawns coming up on the queen side. Magnus' opponent playing white is Arkadij Naiditsch, the German #1 grandmaster, and this was played in the Corus weekend Z tournaments Group B in 2006, 20th of January to be precise. Naiditsch was 2-6-5-7, Magnus Carlsen was 2-6-2-5, so the 16-year-old, about 16, 2-6-2-5. And Queen G5 had just been played by Magnus. And it seems here that in this particular position, the bishop is actually doing a job, so to speak, of preventing actually E4. If black had done something like E4 there, then taking is actually a total disaster because we're actually on F4. So queen takes E4, we can just take bishop takes F4. So the bishop's doing something there, even though it seems a bit weird. But so Magnus' move queen G5 means that nothing's actually changed, actually, apart from maybe with pinning the pawn. No, actually something has changed. With pressure on G2, black does have a very significant threat here, which needs to be addressed. I think this helps explain White's next move here. Can you see what black might be threatening in this position? Okay, if I gave you 5 seconds, well, bishop A6 is actually, if black was given another move, then bishop A6 would be very, very dangerous, because if queen F2, then knight H3 check. You might think, well, a move like A4 actually kind of addresses that bishop A6. If bishop A6 here, then B5, and also that helps White's strategic agenda, for the passed pawns on the queen side. So A4 looks like a very good move, but instead White played king H1. Now the king, you'll notice intuitively, and this came up in a post-mortem recently on the Blitz game, the king is on the same colour as the light square bishop. So if only Magnus could play E4 one day, then this diagonal would be dangerous. Yeah, notice the king on the same colour as the bishop. Magnus actually plays now move H5, and from an engine perspective, Magnus is actually down by it's plus 3.39 in White's favour here. So White technically is doing well, and the move prompted by engines include A4, moving the queen, rook B1. There is also what was played, which was bishop C5. And you might not think that there's a big problem with bishop C5, except that the E4 possibility has just been unveiled. But White's idea, it seems natural enough to invoke this pin on the knight, and then to follow up with potentially one day trying to exploit that carefully with say G3. Now Magnus taps into a slight weakness of the last move here. This does weaken that diagonal, and it actually facilitates now the possibility of playing E4, which is precisely what Magnus played now. He played actually E4. And you see, this is actually quite dangerous. This pawn chain with the light square bishop is exceptionally dangerous here. And there's a number of moves though which would retain an advantage here for White. There's at least 4 moves which are more than +1. The fifth, he's starting to get on dodgy territory. So black is actually, he's onto something. Magnus is onto something here. This pawn chain attack seems as though White needs to play now precisely, actually, from a technical perspective. And I'll illustrate that very shortly. But if I gave you this position as White, what natural move would come to mind? And especially if you were biased by the last move you've played, it seems to have the intention of bishop e3. So what would you play if I gave you 5 seconds to pause the video here and, you know, carefully think, what would you play here? So 5 seconds starting from now. Okay, it's a bit of a tricky position, clearly. I mean, just to illustrate how tricky, you know, f takes is not on f4 because we haven't got the bishop there. So bishop takes is actually a disaster for white. You know, how do we defend g2? For example, like this. This is pretty bad. You know, queen f2 here, knight h3 check is mate. So that's the kind of disaster. So is the bishop able to profitably eye you know, the f4 knight or pin it? So in fact, in the game we did see actually the move bishop e3, and it looks natural enough. Now the engine moves like a4 is still plus, you know, more than +2, or rook e1 is more than +2, even rook b1 nearly +2, queen f2 is 1.5. Rook c1, there's all these possibilities which you know, keep white's advantage. But yeah, bishop e3 was actually played, and now, yeah, this is a sort of danger signal, really, inherent in the position, the light square bishop and the king on the light square. So can you see what Magnus played here? Well, the first move doesn't look too difficult to spot. So I'll give you the first move. Well, I can give you 5 seconds first now. Okay, e takes f3. It extends the scope of the bishop positionally. If nothing else, it's extending the scope of the bishop and actually leaving white technically with an isolated f pawn, because there's no time for bishop takes f4 here, because f takes g2 check. And then we're taking with queen with check, etc. And it's actually a forced mate in 3 after that. So, so g takes f3 was played. And can you see now what Magnus played in this position? Which kind of wins the game, actually. So 5 seconds starting from now. Okay, I hope you found it. It's a really crushing move which exists here, using the pin on the f pawn, which is based on the fact that the king is on the light square. Otherwise, you could argue the pin wouldn't exist if the king was, say, on g1. Queen g4. It's extremely unfortunate that white can't actually now do anything about this f3 pawn. I think Naiditsch must be a bit gutted, because he had an advantage throughout this game, and it seems here it's a total disaster. Now, for example, bishop takes. We play bishop takes and we win the queen, and we don't just win the queen, we can now just take on f4. We're massively up. So yeah, it's a total disaster, and there's actually, you know, very little white can do. So h3 as another example. Here, black can keep up the pressure. What would you play in this position? Okay, queen g3 is the right move. Simply keeps this bishop takes f3 check without king h2 being available. So it's still entirely horrible for white, this position. Entirely hopeless. So h3 doesn't actually change the picture. If you had said bishop takes f3 here, then there's king h2, and white is actually better here again. So yeah, queen g3 just seals white's fate there. Now if we go back to this position, yeah, it does seem like the natural tendency to pin, you know, pin and win, yeah, is not really appropriate here for the position. There are already some specific danger signals in the position. The king on the light square, same as that bishop. So in fact, this position already required great care. And the amusing thing is, if we look at each and every engine move which secures an advantage, a4, which could have been played earlier against the bishop a6 threat, leaving the king on a dark square, by the way, also does facilitate rook a3, And what this means is, after E takes, G takes, Queen G4, there's Rook A3 here, and White's still going to carry on the Queen side later. And this should have been nothing. It should have been absolutely nothing. But you know, it shows that what does Black actually do in this position. So yeah, the A4 is like dual purpose. You know, not just for the passed pawns, but to maintain the pawn chain. And it could have been played earlier. Also, I mean, in this position, Rook E1. Again, it doesn't look that maybe natural as pinning the knight. But again, you know, potentially now we've got Rook E3. It's as simple as that. Each of the engine moves takes account basically of Queen G4, except Bishop E3 doesn't. This is the pain and sorrow of chess here, right here in this example. You know, other moves, Rook B1 maintains an advantage. Again, you know, takes. We're going to have Rook B3. Still the advantage for White there. So each of these moves, it gets a little bit less with Queen F2. Maybe there's some complication here. It seems a little bit technically less, as though Queen F5 might be implying something. But yeah, Queen G4, we can now actually play Rook G1. So that's another way of indirectly defending. You know, Bishop takes F3 here, Queen takes F3. So it's just, you know, instantly the engine sees all these moves, which is another reason why computers are so amazing. They all carry, basically, they carry with them all prophylaxis against this specific tactical idea, like here, Rook C3. But Rook C1 is not entirely ideal, apparently, because apparently Bishop A6 in this position is a bit of a nuisance, and it reduces White's advantage to only half a pawn, actually. If we look at this one, there'll be Knight D3. It's not an ideal spot. So there's ideal kind of prophylaxis, ideal precision moves, and less than ideal. And this is a less than ideal, where, okay, White has to be very careful to play F4 here. And apparently this is now actually a little bit better for Black, tiny bit better for Black. So ideal prophylaxis moves, you know, addressing the threats here. But the thing is, White actually, if you look at this earlier, White actually made it a little bit difficult, because the king was quite happy away from the light square bishop. So in fact, if we look at the earlier game sequence, so after this Queen G5, it does seem okay if this was the threat being addressed. But the king is actually on the opposite colour as the bishop. The move A4 is entirely ideal from not just a prophylaxis angle against Bishop A6, but also Rook A3, adding to the security of the pawn chain if this break is ever made. So the bishop is actually already quite well suited for discouraging E4 in any case. So in this position, you know, it seems as though White can potentially just push the pawns here if nothing else. It seems, although after bishop here, again, there's a threat of bishop c4. So actually, even the engine is now suggesting the counterintuitive, putting the king on the light square because of that bishop c4. So even this example, yeah, bishop c4. So the engine suggestion is actually king h1 here, but we can't yet go for e4 because of the f4. And so, you know, this is tricky. Again, bishop c4 here, we just play queen f2 without the knight h3 check resource. So I guess, yeah, unpinning there is actually concretely, you know, very good to allow queen f2. But yeah, it just shows how vicious chess can be, really. If I show you the earlier game, it seems like you know, Magnus Carlsen Sveshnikov looked a little bit dodgy, to say the least, because if you look at what happened earlier in the game, I'll just briefly go through the game. Magnus was not able to castle kingside even. He had to put his king, seems outrageously moving his king to g6 here. So with king f7, so White's advantage was nearly +3 in this game. White's, you know, winning that b5 pawn, but yeah, the dynamic play, the rook takes d6 here, you know, keeps basically that potentially dangerous light square bishop and these little tricks on g2, which are being created here. So bishop h6, bishop a6 in particular. So yeah, it's just fascinating how this disaster really happened here. So bishop e3 and then just taking and then queen g4. But the prophylaxis, the specific prophylaxis with a4, yeah, it's easy in retrospect. And there's other moves which all keep an eye on the pawn chain. So I guess, yeah, it just shows that chess is incredibly complex. You might have some general rules about pinning or unpinning or keeping the king away from the bishop, but sometimes you might need to, as in some of the variations we saw. So yeah, I hope this video was instructive for sometimes being wary. I think the main point I was trying to make with it, being wary of natural looking pinning moves, maybe to look at the concrete threats that are implied, which not only increase the scope sometimes of the opponent's pieces, but actually, you know, absolutely can be deadly for king safety. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.